This is a tobacco leaf, a cigar tobacco leaf. This is two. These leaves are from different varieties, but what they have in common is that they grew in my backyard a couple of years ago. I started them from seed, and then once the plant was mature, harvested the leaves, fermented the leaves, processed the leaves, and they've been aging in a tub for the last couple of years. I'm about ready to start turning these into proper cigars, and so I am taking this opportunity to talk in more general terms about how one goes about turning leaf like this into a proper cigar. And so follow along. First, what we want is some filler leaf. Filler leaf is, again, just tobacco leaf where part of the central stem of the leaf has been removed. We call this frog-legged leaf because, well, you can imagine, kind of looks like frog legs when you tear out part of the central stem. Filler leaf is what goes into the center of the bunch. It goes into the middle of the tube that will eventually be the cigar. And since a cigar is nothing but leaves wrapped into other leaves and then lit on fire, the filler will end up making up the largest proportion of tobacco in any blend. A blend is just a combination of different leaf types, different countries of origin possibly, different varieties of tobacco, different primings, as in different levels on the plant where the particular leaf grew. Something dark and leathery like this typically grows towards the top of the plant. Something that is more thin and burns a lot better like this typically grows on the bottom part of the tobacco blend. And so you take a blend like this, you select a few leaves, and then you roll them up and you light them on fire, and there's your cigar. Now when we do that, we'd want something to hold all these leaves together. And so for that purpose, I've prepared some binder leaf. Again, this is just a tobacco leaf, and the difference between filler and binder for the purpose of processing is that for binder, we expose the leaf to a higher level of humidity for some time so that it becomes nicely pliable and elastic and can be used to wrap the bunch. If we tried to do the same with leaf that is in a more dry state, in a lower case, as we say, then we wouldn't be able to accomplish a tight wrap, since this would break, this would shatter. And so we're going to take this leaf, this binder leaf, and remove the central stem. This is trash, and now we have two halves of these leaves. This is the binder that we're going to use to hold together the bunch. I'm laying it out here like this. Maybe we'll end up using both sides of that. It's all dependent upon how large of a cigar you're making and how long of a cigar you're making and how big the binder leaf actually is. So for the sake of illustration, let's just take a blend. Let's take one of these leaves and attempt to bring it into a shape that roughly resembles a cigar. Right now, this looks nothing like a cigar, and we want this at the end to be a sort of tubular shape. Now, there's a bunch of different traditions and a bunch of different ways in which one can accomplish this and bring a flat leaf into a tubular shape that loosely resembles a cigar. You can tube up each individual leaf, like what I am doing here. You could fold them accordion style. You could fold them like a book. There's a number of different ways that you could accomplish the same thing. And it's not really important, except for you want to make sure that the correct amount of leaf for the size of cigar that you eventually want to end up with is actually contained in this bunch. If you use too much leaf for the size that you want to roll, then you're not going to be able to achieve the size and still have a draw and still actually draw smoke through your tube. It'll be plugged. If you don't use enough leaf, then you'll also run into problems. Then your cigar won't have a nice consistent shape. It won't be a tight sort of tube. It might have some bumps and bulges, and it might also just burn way too fast and way too hot. But what we're going to do, as I've just done, is in some way, shape, or form take these flat leaves and roll them up in a binder leaf. So leaf inside leaf. This kind of loosely resembles a cigar. Not quite yet. It's still a little bit rough looking. No cigar at a store would look like this, and we have these weird sort of ends to deal with. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off one of the ends. And so if we now wanted to glue this whole bunch together, we can use some vegetable glue, some Burmacol in this case, some cigar glue, and apply a little dab at the very tip here. And when we roll that shut, now we can let go of the bunch and it's not going to unravel all by itself. All right? Then we still don't exactly have a cigar. It still looks a little bit weird. And so what we might want to do is actually put this into a mold. The mold is going to do a couple of things. The mold, in this case what I have here is a wooden mold, is going to even out this bunch. It's already rolled pretty evenly. I've made an effort to make sure that there's an even amount of tobacco all through the length of the cigar, but it's going to even out the appearance, and importantly, it's also going to compress the bunch a little bit. Right now, if I were to take a draw off of this cigar-shaped sort of thing, it would be a very, very loose draw. And that's on purpose, because we want this mold, this cigar mold in this case, to do part of the work of shaping the cigar. I've inserted this bunch now into the mold, and I'm going to apply the other half of this mold. And you can probably best see on the end what's happening when I do that. So I inserted the cigar into the bottom slot here, and now the top part of the mold is going to come in, and it's going to press everything down nicely into the shape of a cigar. Then we wait. All right, we put some weight on this. We maybe put this into a press, and after some time, we want to take this bunch and we want to rotate it to make sure that the press happens evenly all across its circumference, and then we move on to the next step. Now, it should be obvious that not all cigars are the same size, and so what I've rolled here is a particularly skinny cigar. This cigar will have a 36 ring gauge, and so it's quite a skinny one. If we wanted to roll a thicker cigar, well, of course we could. In that case, we would roll a bunch that is more appropriate for a larger mold. I would take these leaves and roll them together into each other in such a way that they properly then fit into the mold that we're looking for. For example, this 52 ring gauge mold. This one happens to be plastic. Molds come in a variety of different materials. Traditionally, they're wood. More modern molds might be 3D printed using whatever plastic it is that 3D printing people use, and professionals tend to use these types of molds that are actually HPDE and CNC milled plastic. Now, just for the sake of illustration, let's take another blend. Let's take some more of these leaves, and if I tube them up like this, and then take another leaf, maybe this one, tube it up like that, take another one of those, and also tube it up like this, and then take some of this big leaf that I didn't use all up last time, and also put into here, and then take this whole bunch and say, double it up, cut it in half, and then put it together like so. Clean up the ends a little bit. Put those ends back in to achieve an even circumference all around, and then roll that bunch up into an approximately cigar-shaped object. Then we've done exactly the same thing. We've taken some leaf and we have rolled it into another leaf in such a way that it approximately resembles a cigar. We want to pay attention to how this filler in here is laying inside the bunch. You can see here that I'm paying attention to the fact that this should be nice and straight. There shouldn't be any twists in here to ensure that there is a proper draw through the cigar when we're all done with it. Same process as before. Cut off the end here where things start to get thin. And so you see there's a piece of this binder that I didn't use, and some scraggly bits that ended up getting cut off as well. Apply a dab of glue if we want. We could also clean up the head a little bit, shape this head a little bit in order to make it rounded, and already kind of anticipate the shape that the final cigar should be taking. These things we can save for scrap rolls or compost, whatever you want. And now we have a different sort of cigar. This particular cigar, I think, will fit nicely into our 52-inch mold. And it does. Right? Now you see this end I've left a little bit scraggly, and in this case it also doesn't protrude past the end of this mold. And so what you could do is immediately cut off the end with a tuck cutter and say that really this is also scraggly end, and now I now have a cigar that even more so looks like a cigar, but still of course hasn't been pressed yet. Let's put this guy in and press it. One final note about the bunch. We can see here that this bunch is approximately 5 3/4 inches long. We want to leave this bunch a little bit longer than the final length of the cigar, because when we take this out of this mold, we're going to apply a wrapper, and that wrapper we're going to apply the wrapper in such a way that if we want to clean the cigar up nicely, we're going to cut off a little bit of the foot, the end right here, the end that you actually light. And so if this is 5 3/4 inches at this point, then the final cigar will probably end up being around 5 1/4 to 5 1/2 inches long. And so now there's our second example. Let's take a look at the first one that we just bunched. If I open this mold, you'll see that the cigar shape is not quite achieved yet. 100%, but it's kind of getting close. And when I take this out, you'll see that the press has left some of these seams here. And what you normally do is, after a few minutes of being inside the mold and being pressed down, you take the bunch out and you turn it 90 degrees and put it right back in, so that these seams that have been created by the mold are going to be pressed out. And then you put it back into the press under some weights for as long as is necessary. What is necessary? Well, let's take a look at another set of cigars that I had rolled earlier. Here you can see they've been inside the press for a little bit longer. If I take them out, you'll see that they've stiffened up. This one has stiffened up. It's no longer quite as floppy. It has dried out some. The wood has wicked some of the moisture out of the binder. And the cigar has been shaped quite nicely. What we can see, for example, here, if you look at the tail, is how thick this bunch used to be when we put it in, and how much it has been compressed by the mold in the last hour or so that this has been in here. Normally, I would probably leave this in for just a little bit longer, but for the sake of this demonstration, I think what I'm going to do is immediately take this and move on to the next step, which is wrapping the cigar. What we can do now is also draw test this bunch. Just put it to your lips, draw on the head as if it were a cigar, and see whether you like the draw. Is the draw too light? Then, well, you didn't use enough tobacco. Maybe you can take this bunch and put it into a smaller sized mold. If the draw is too tight and actually no airflow comes through the head when you suck on it, then you can leave the bunch out for some time and see if it naturally expands. You could roll it out on the surface, and then for next time you'll know to use a little bit less tobacco for that given size. All right, wrapping. How are we going to wrap? Since a cigar is nothing but leaves wrapped into other leaves, the wrapper that's applied is also a tobacco leaf. Wrapper leaf also has additional humidity applied, has the leaf exposed to some higher level of humidity for some time in order to make it nice and pliable, nice and flexible, just like the binder leaf. The difference between a binder leaf and a wrapper leaf is primarily cosmetics. We want the wrapper leaf to be pretty. We want the wrapper leaf to be free of holes. We want the wrapper leaf to really whet your appetite when you look at the cigar. It's the nice dress that you put on the outside of a bunch. The binder, it may contain holes. The binder is going to be covered by the wrapper anyway. But this wrapper, this is what you look at when you pick up the cigar. And so we want this to be in really nice shape. What I do now is prepare this wrapper, cut off the outer edge of it, get it ready for wrapping my cigar. And there's lots of videos out there that will show you the finer points of how you should cut this wrapper, or how you could cut this wrapper, and how you wrap cigars in general. Here, I'm just going to do it for the sake of illustration rather quickly. Here's the cigar that we're going to wrap. And the first order of business, of course, is to get rid of this tail at the end that is hanging out, that hung out of the mold. I'm going to use my tuck cutter to just get rid of it. I had already draw tested this. It's perfect. Still is perfect. And so now we're ready to wrap this thing. I'm going to take this leaf and stretch the wrapper nicely and make sure that we are letting it live up to its potential of making us a pretty cigar. Trying to avoid any tears, and just like the binder before, apply a little bit of vegetable gum here at the top in order to seal it all up. And here now is a proper cigar, almost. Right. This now has the pretty wrapper applied. It's smooth. We've stretched out some of the veins that are in the wrapper. It still looks a little bit rough, but it'll definitely beauty up as we let it rest and as we let it dry and as we let the filler inside that's now quite dry expand and tighten up the seams on the cigar that we have just wrapped. Now the last step, and possibly one of the more difficult steps of wrapping a cigar like this, is to actually apply the cap to the head. And there's also a number of different traditions and a number of different ways in which one can actually do this. What I usually do is I cut a what's called flag out of the remaining piece of the leaf that I didn't use, like so. And then I use this flag to shape the head. Now I'm going to trim this a little bit here, apply some glue to the flag, cut off the little tip of tobacco that got left, and apply another wrap of leaf right here at the head only. That's going to keep things together nicely when you cut it and then put it in your mouth and light it on fire, so that you have a little bit more to hold on to with your lips and the thing doesn't immediately unravel. If you don't want to do that, you can just cut off the end immediately, and then it's called a cheroot. Definitely smokable. But traditionally, cigars have caps that are a little bit prettier and just more polished looking than a cheroot would. So this is now the second cap that I've added to this cigar. A triple cap cigar would now also add a little piece of tobacco at the end, at the very tip, and a little round piece like this that is cut with a casquillo is the name of this thing. And then here we go, we have ourselves a proper cigar. The very last step is to cut it to length. This particular cigar came out of a 38 ring gauge mold, and it is quite long. This is a classic Lancero type cigar. My Lanceros are 7 5/8 inches long, and that is long enough to actually make that happen. So, boom, cut it off, and Bob's your auntie. All right. Here's a cigar. This is essentially what's about to happen with the other leaf that I've grown a few years ago in my backyard. And that's it, right? You can roll whatever you like. You may have a long skinny shape like this. You may prefer cigars that are a little bit fatter, that are a little bit shorter. For example, this is the bunch of the 52 that we rolled earlier. You can see this is going to make, when it's all said and done, a very different sort of cigar. You may prefer a different type of wrapper leaf. This is a Connecticut leaf right here. You may choose a different sort of variety, different sort of origin, God knows what, for your wrapper. But it's all really, really kind of basic. You take some leaves that have been properly prepared and you roll them up into other sort of leaves, and then you light them on fire and you enjoy a few moments of bliss. Right. So that's it. Cheers.